Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sleepy Shadows. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and fall asleep. If today was long or heavy, I'll do my best to make your night a little more comfortable with these stories. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy calm, quiet horror stories like these, you're welcome to subscribe. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. When my cousin was 18 years old, his life changed in a way that no one in our family could have ever imagined. He was young, full of energy, and standing right at the edge of adulthood, with plans and possibilities ahead of him. Like many people that age, he thought he was invincible. None of us expect something truly life-altering to happen so suddenly, especially not something that begins with a simple drive and ends with tragedy. One night, he was involved in a terrible car accident. It was violent, sudden, and devastating. He was in the car with his girlfriend and her sister. The crash was so severe that when emergency services arrived at the scene, there was little hope. After assessing them, authorities pronounced all three of them dead at the scene. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, and as far as anyone knew at that moment, 3 young lives were gone. News like that hits a family like a bomb. There is no gentle way to hear it. The police were sent to notify my aunt, his mother. When they arrived at her home, they carried the kind of silence that only comes with tragedy. They told her what had happened, that her son had been in a wreck, and that he had died along with the 2 girls in the car. In that moment, her world collapsed. Everything she knew, everything she had planned for her child's future, vanished in a few sentences. Even through the shock and unbearable grief, my aunt managed to think clearly enough to make one specific request. She asked that her son be sent to a particular funeral home. It was one the family trusted, a place she felt comfortable with. That request was honored, and arrangements began the way they always do when someone is believed to be gone. At the funeral home, the staff prepared to begin the embalming process. They had received the body with the understanding that death had already been confirmed. There was nothing unusual about this from their perspective. They had done this countless times before. Death, as tragic as it is, becomes routine in that line of work. But then something happened that no one was prepared for. As they were working on my cousin's body, he suddenly raised himself up and spoke. He looked around and asked, "Where the hell am I?" In that instant, the room changed forever. The shock must have been indescribable. A young man who had been officially declared dead, who was lying on a table in a funeral home, suddenly conscious and confused. And the funeral director later said it was the first and only time in his career that he ever had to go home and change his pants. It was not meant as humor in the moment, but as a way to explain just how completely unprepared he was for what happened. What makes the situation even more unbelievable is the condition my cousin was in. The top of his head had been open from the crash, and his brain was exposed. By all medical logic, survival seemed impossible. There was visible, catastrophic trauma. No one expected him to be alive, let alone conscious enough to speak. Emergency services were called immediately, and my cousin was rushed to the hospital. Everything shifted from funeral arrangements to emergency medical care in a matter of moments. The same police officer who had come to my aunt's house earlier that day was sent back again. Saxon, this time, instead of delivering news of death, he had to explain something almost impossible to believe. He told her that her son was not dead. He was alive and in the hospital. Imagine hearing that. Hours earlier, she had been told her child was gone forever. She had begun the process of grief that feels endless and suffocating. Now, suddenly, she was being told that her son was alive. The emotional whiplash alone must have been overwhelming. shock layered on top of grief, mixed with disbelief and fragile hope. Doctors were cautious. Given the severity of his injuries, especially the trauma to his head, they prepared the family for the worst. They warned my aunt that if he survived, he would almost certainly be in a vegetative state. There was little expectation of recovery. They spoke in careful, clinical terms, trying not to offer false hope. Even so, hope crept in. When someone you love comes back from the dead, even in the smallest sense, you cling to any possibility. The days that followed were filled with fear, waiting, and uncertainty. Machines monitored his body. Doctors watched for signs of brain function. Family members took turns sitting by his bedside, unsure of what they were hoping for or what they were afraid of. Every small movement felt significant. Every moment felt heavy. Weeks passed. And then something happened that no one could explain. My cousin began to improve. Slowly at first, then more noticeably. He responded. He became more aware. He regained functions doctors never expected him to regain. Each improvement challenged everything they had predicted. Where they had once spoken of permanent damage and a life without awareness, they now watched a young man fighting his way back. And then, one day, he walked out of the hospital. Not carried, not wheeled. He walked. It was nothing short of a miracle. There is no other word that fits. Medical explanations can try to fill in the gaps, but even the doctors acknowledged that his recovery defied expectations. He had been declared dead. He had catastrophic head injuries. He had raised up in a funeral home and asked where he was. And now he was leaving the hospital on his own 2 feet. My aunt later said that day was both the worst and the best day of her life. Worst because she had already lived through the unbearable pain of losing her son. Best because she got him back. Few people ever experience both in such a short span of time. When that kind of experience changes a person forever, it changes how you see life, death, and the thin line between them. It leaves questions that may never have answers. Where was he during that time? What happened in those moments when he was declared dead? Why did he come back when others did not? The family never fully stopped wondering. For my cousin, survival came with its own challenges, both physical and emotional. Coming back from something like that leaves scars that cannot always be seen. But he was alive. He had a future again. And that alone felt like a gift that could never be fully repaid. Stories like this are hard to believe unless you hear them from someone who lived through them. They sound like something out of a movie or an urban legend. But this was real. It happened to our family. It unfolded in police notifications, or hospital rooms, and a funeral home where death was supposed to be final. Sometimes, the line between life and death is not as clear as we think. Sometimes, it bends in ways that make no sense at all. And sometimes, against all odds, someone steps back across it. My cousin did. And for my aunt, that moment when she learned her son was alive again will always remain both a nightmare and a miracle wrapped into one unforgettable day. I was around 13 or 14 years old when this happened, right at that age where you're old enough to move around the house on your own at night, but still young enough that the dark can get under your skin if something feels off. It was late, not deep into the night, but late enough that the house had settled into that quiet state where everything feels muted and hollow. I was upstairs, heading into the bathroom. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway on the second floor, and it had a large window that looked out over the backyard. The light in the hallway was on, casting a dim yellow glow into the bathroom, and being lazy like any teenager, I decided not to turn the bathroom light on. The hallway light was enough to see, and I wasn't planning to be in there long anyway. The bathroom window faced the back of the house, as where the yard dropped down and then rose again into a wooded hill. Beyond that hill was another small development, but it was sparsely populated, mostly trees, brush, and darkness at night. During the day, it looked harmless. At night, it felt endless. So there I was, standing there, half awake, half distracted, doing my business. I wasn't thinking about anything unusual. My mind was completely empty, the way it often is when you're doing something routine and unimportant. That's when I noticed the light. At first, it barely registered. Out in the woods, about a quarter mile away, there was a faint glow. It wasn't bright, and it wasn't pointed at me. It looked like the backside of a flashlight beam, like someone was holding a flashlight but facing away from the house, so the light was diffused and indirect. I paused and looked at it more carefully. The light wasn't moving. It hadn't been there a moment before. It just appeared. It didn't sway or bounce the way a person walking with a flashlight would. It didn't flicker. It was just there, hovering among the trees. My first thought was that it might be some kind of motion-activated tracker light, the kind hunters use or the kind that might turn on if an animal passes by. That explanation made sense, and I didn't feel scared at first, just curious. I went back to what I was doing, but the light didn't go away. A full minute passed, and it was still there, still glowing softly, still facing away from me. That's when my curiosity turned into unease. Motion lights usually shut off pretty quickly, and even if someone was out there with a flashlight, they would have moved by now. I stepped closer to the window. As soon as I did, the light changed. It turned, not slowly drifting or wobbling, but deliberately rotating, like someone turning a flashlight in their hand. The beam swung around until it was pointed directly at me. At first it was wide and scattered, like the beam hadn't fully focused yet. Then it sharpened. The light narrowed, intensified, and focused into a strong, direct beam aimed straight at the bathroom window. It was incredibly bright. Bright enough that I could see its reflection clearly in the glass. But here's the part that still doesn't make sense to me. It didn't light up the room. The beam was bright, blinding even, but only in that narrow line between the source and me. The bathroom itself stayed dim, lit only by the hallway light. The walls didn't glow. The floor didn't brighten. It was like the light existed only for me. Then it started moving. Slowly at first, then steadily, the beam began closing the distance between itself and the window. And I don't mean the light spreading wider or brighter. I mean the source itself was coming closer. To give some perspective, this was a third-story bathroom. There was a good 40-foot drop from the window straight down to the ground. Beyond that was the yard, then the hill that rose back up into the woods. The light had been at least a quarter mile away when I first saw it, and now it was coming toward me as if it were moving on solid ground. It didn't bounce, it didn't sway, it didn't arc downward or upward. It moved in a straight line toward the window, maintaining its height, maintaining its focus, as if whatever was producing it wasn't bound by the terrain at all. Oh, that's when fear finally hit me. Not sudden panic, but a cold, creeping realization that whatever this was, it wasn't normal. My heart started racing. My chest tightened. I couldn't hear anything else in the house anymore. My entire attention was locked on that light. It felt like it was aware of me. Like the moment I stepped closer to the window, it reacted. Like it had been waiting for me to notice it. As the light drew closer, it became even brighter. I could feel the intensity of it, even though it still didn't illuminate the room. It was as if it was shining directly into me rather than around me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and bolted for the light switch. The second my hand hit the switch and the bathroom lights came on, the light outside vanished. Not faded, not moved away. vanished. The woods outside were suddenly pitch black again, exactly as they should have been. No glow, no reflection, nothing. I rushed back to the window, my heart pounding, scanning the trees and the hill, searching for any sign of movement. There was nothing. No flashlight beam, no person, no sound. Just darkness. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. My brain desperately tried to come up with explanations. A helicopter spotlight? No sound? A car? Impossible angle and distance. Someone with a flashlight? No way they could move like that. Eventually, I turned off the bathroom light and went back to my room. But I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that beam turning toward me, focusing, locking on. Even now, years later, I don't know what it was. I've replayed that moment in my head countless times. I've tried to rationalize it, to explain it away as a trick of light or imagination. But no explanation fully fits. The way it moved, the way it reacted, the way it disappeared instantly when the lights came on. Whatever it was, it noticed me. And that's the part that still unsettles me the most. Because for a brief moment, standing there in that dark bathroom, it felt like something out there in the woods had found me. And I don't think I was supposed to see it. I grew up in a very small village, the kind of place most people would probably miss if they drove through it too quickly. There were around 60 people living there, give or take, and everyone knew everyone else. It was located near the Czech border, surrounded by fields, forests, and rolling hills. Life there was quiet, predictable, and slow. As a child, it felt safe. There were no busy streets, no crowds, no constant noise, just nature, old houses, and long winters. Because the village was so small, there wasn't much for kids to do indoors, especially in the colder months. When winter came, we spent as much time outside as possible, even after dark. Snow made everything feel magical, especially when you're 10 years old and don't yet associate cold with discomfort. Where the streets were lit by a few old street lamps that cast soft yellow circles onto the snow. And that was more than enough for us. One evening in November, my friend and I were playing outside in the snow. It was already dark, but neither of us cared. We were bundled up, laughing, throwing snowballs, and leaving messy footprints everywhere. The cold air made our cheeks sting, but it also made us feel alive. The village was silent, except for our voices, and the crunch of snow under our boots. After about 20 minutes, something caught my attention. At first, I didn't understand why my stomach suddenly tightened. It was just a small shift in awareness, like when you feel someone watching you even before you turn around. I looked up towards the hill across the pond. That hill had always been there, looming quietly over the village, but we rarely paid attention to it at night. On top of that hill stood an abandoned house. The house had been empty for as long as I could remember. No one lived there, no lights ever turned on. The windows were dark, the walls worn down by time. In front of the house were several huge trees, their branches thick and tangled, casting strange shadows even during the day. At night, the place felt completely lifeless, like something frozen in time. That night, I noticed a light. It was small, very small. It sat just about 30 centimeters above the ground, near one of the large trees in front of the abandoned house. It wasn't bright like a flashlight or a street lamp. It was soft and steady, glowing in a way that immediately felt wrong. The shape of it reminded me of a lantern. More unsettling than the light itself was its position. It was low, far too low to be coming from a window. It looked like someone was squatting there, holding the light close to the ground. The glow didn't flicker or move. It just stayed there, perfectly still. At first, I didn't say anything. I stood there, watching it, trying to figure out what I was seeing. My brain searched for explanations. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe someone left something out there. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the longer I stared, the more uncomfortable I felt. Eventually, I asked my friend if she could see it too. I remember trying to sound casual, like I wasn't scared. I pointed toward the hill and asked her if she noticed the light near the abandoned house. She looked where I pointed, squinting into the darkness. Then she nodded. She could see it too, and that's when the fear really started to set in. If it had just been me, I might have convinced myself it wasn't real. But she saw it clearly, just as I did. We stood there under the streetlight, staring across the pond, talking in hushed voices about what it could be. The longer we talked, the worse it felt. Neither of us could come up with a reasonable explanation. The light didn't move. It didn't grow brighter or dimmer. It just stayed there. Eventually, the fear became too much. We stopped playing, turned around, and hurried home. Neither of us ran, but we walked fast, our boots slipping slightly on the snow. I remember looking back over my shoulder more than once, half expecting the light to follow us somehow. That night, I barely slept. The next day, we told our parents what we had seen. We tried to explain it carefully. On describing the location, the height, the way it looked like a lantern, they laughed. Not in a cruel way, but in the way adults sometimes do when they think children are imagining things. They told us it was probably just a reflection of light in one of the windows of the abandoned house. That explanation didn't sit right with me. The windows of that house were much higher than where the light had been. We knew that. We had seen the house countless times during the day. The light had been far too low to be coming from a window. Still, the adults dismissed it. Despite being scared, curiosity got the better of us. We decided to walk up the hill during the day to see if we could find anything. The snow was still thick, around 20 centimeters deep, covering everything in white. The pond was frozen solid, and the air was crisp and silent. As we climbed the hill, the village behind us grew smaller. The abandoned house looked even more unsettling up close. Its walls were cracked, and the roof sagged in places. The trees in front of it towered over us, their bare branches stretching out like twisted arms. That's when we noticed the footprints. They were coming from the direction of the nearby woods. Clear, distinct footprints, pressed deep into the snow. They crossed over pasture fences, something no one in the village would bother doing for no reason. The prints continued straight toward the tree where we had seen the light the night before. The snow around the base of that tree was stomped down. It looked like someone had stood there for a while. From there, the footprints continued through a narrow passage between the abandoned house and the barn beside it. What was under the snow in that narrow walkway were shards of old roof tiles, broken and sharp, scattered across the ground. It wasn't a place anyone would walk through casually, especially not in the middle of winter. No one in our village would ever go there. There was no reason to. The house was abandoned, the land wasn't used, the path was dangerous and pointless. And yet, someone had clearly been there. Someone had walked through deep snow, crossed fences, stood near that tree, and then disappeared behind the buildings. We stood there in silence, staring at the footprints, our fear deepening. We told people what we found. Again, they laughed. They told us we were just stupid kids, letting our imaginations run wild. They said footprints could belong to anyone, an animal, a drunk passerby, someone cutting across the land. But none of those explanations made sense to us. Animals don't stomp snow down in one spot like that. People don't walk barefoot paths of broken roof tiles for no reason. For about a month after that, we kept seeing the light. Always in the same place. Always low to the ground. Sometimes we saw it together. Sometimes I saw it alone. Every time I looked up at that hill, my chest tightened. I felt watched, even when the light wasn't there. The abandoned house no longer felt empty. It felt occupied in a way that didn't make sense. Then, one day, the light disappeared. It never came back. There was no explanation. No event that marked its disappearance. It was just gone, as suddenly as it had appeared. But the feeling never left. Even after it was gone, every time I looked up that hill, I felt uneasy. Like something was still there, hidden, and waiting. The house remained abandoned, silent, unchanged. The trees still loomed. The footprints eventually vanished as the snow melted. People eventually stopped talking about it. But I never forgot. For years afterward, the memory haunted me. It wasn't just the sight of the light. It was the shared experience. The fact that my friend saw it too. The footprints. The way adults dismissed us without really listening. Even now, when I think back to that time, I remember the feeling more than anything else. The feeling of being watched. The feeling that something was happening just beyond our understanding. And the knowledge that whatever it was real enough to leave marks in the snow. And that more than anything still scares me. When I was younger, around 10 or 11 years old, I lived in a house in California that sat on a fairly large piece of land. For a suburban area, it felt huge to me. The property was about an acre, which meant there was plenty of space between our house and the neighbors. As a kid, that space felt like freedom during the day, but at night, it made everything feel quieter, darker, and more isolated. My bedroom was on the side of the house that faced the side yard. That side yard wasn't empty. We kept our motorhome there, parked neatly under a large cover to protect it from the sun and weather. The motorhome was tall and bulky, and during the day it cast a long shadow across the yard. At night, it turned into a dark, silent shape that I was very familiar with. I had looked out that window countless times and knew exactly what the yard was supposed to look like in the dark. At that age, my bedtime was strict. Around 8 o'clock, I was expected to be in bed, lights off and quiet. I didn't always fall asleep right away, though. I would often lie there listening to the house, to the distant sounds of the television, or to my dad moving around outside. My dad was the kind of person who liked to stay busy late into the night. We had a detached garage at the back of the property, and he often worked on projects out there after dark. Sometimes I'd hear tools, sometimes the garage door opening or closing, sometimes just footsteps on the gravel. That night started like any other. I had gone to bed on time and was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, letting my thoughts drift. The house was quiet, but not silent. I knew my dad was still up. That knowledge gave me comfort. It meant I wasn't alone in the dark. Then I noticed the light. It wasn't sudden or flashing. It just appeared outside my window, bathing the room in a strange yellow glow. At first, I assumed it was my dad. I figured he must be out by the motorhome, maybe checking something or moving things around, and that the light was casting shadows in a way that looked unusual. But when I looked toward the window, something felt wrong immediately. I didn't see my dad. I didn't see the familiar shadow of the motorhome. All I saw was light. This wasn't like a normal flashlight or a work light. This light was intense and uniform. It filled my entire room. Every inch, every corner, every object was clearly visible, as if the room itself had become the source of the glow. And the walls, the floor, my bed, my desk, all illuminated evenly in this deep yellow color. I knew right away that my dad didn't own anything like that. He didn't have a flashlight that bright, and certainly not one that color. This wasn't white light. It wasn't warm household light either. It was a strange, saturated yellow that didn't flicker or waver. I sat up slightly in bed, my heart starting to beat faster. For some reason, I didn't feel immediate panic. Instead, I felt frozen, like my body had decided to stop reacting. I just stared. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. It's hard to tell. Time felt stretched, unreal. It was almost like being in a trance, caught between curiosity and fear. Then I saw movement. At first, it was subtle, just a shift in the light itself. Then the shape became clearer. Standing within the glow was a figure. It looked human, but not quite. The first thing I noticed was its head. It was much too large for a normal human body. Not cartoonishly large, but noticeably wrong. The proportions didn't make sense. The body beneath it was extremely thin, far thinner than any person I had ever seen. The limbs looked fragile, almost delicate. I couldn't see facial features clearly. The light was too bright, washing out detail, but I knew it was facing me. I knew it was aware of me. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stared. My mind struggled to understand what I was seeing. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of light, that maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, that maybe I was half asleep and dreaming. But everything felt too real. I could feel the sheets under my hands. I could hear my own breathing. I was fully awake. Then the figure moved. And slowly, deliberately, it lifted one of its arms. The arm was long and thin, matching the rest of its body. It raised its hand, palm open, and waved. It wasn't a fast or frantic movement. It was calm, almost casual. That wave is burned into my memory. The moment the hand finished the gesture, the figure vanished. At the exact same instant, the light disappeared too. 1 second my room was flooded with yellow glow, and the next, it was plunged back into darkness. I sat there blinking, my eyes struggling to adjust. The room looked exactly as it always did at night. Shadows in the corners. Faint light from the hallway. Nothing out of place. Nothing disturbed. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I might have imagined the whole thing. My heart was still racing, but part of my brain desperately wanted a simple explanation. Slowly, carefully, I got out of bed. I walked out of my room and into the living room, where I knew my dad would be. My legs felt unsteady, like they weren't entirely mine. When I reached the living room, I saw him sitting in his recliner, drinking a beer and watching television. He looked completely relaxed, exactly as he always did at night. I stood there for a moment, just staring at him. He looked over and asked what was wrong. I hesitated. I didn't know how to put what I had seen into words. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding ridiculous. Finally, I asked him a simple question. Dad, were you just out by the motorhome? He looked confused and said no. He asked why I was asking. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to tell him I had just seen a strange figure glowing outside my window. I didn't want to see disbelief or laughter on his face. So I just shook my head, mumbled something about nothing, and went back to my room. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound made me tense. Every shadow felt suspicious. I kept expecting the light to come back, but it didn't. The next day, in the daylight, I went outside to look around the side yard. I checked near the motorhome. I looked at the ground, the cover, the surrounding area. There were no marks, no signs of disturbance, nothing that suggested anyone or anything had been there the night before. Everything looked normal. Too normal. As the years passed, I thought about that night less often, but it never completely faded. Every now and then, the memory would surface, vivid and clear. The color of the light, the stillness, the wave, the way it vanished. To this day, I have no idea what I saw, I don't know if it was something explainable that my mind twisted into something else, or if it was something I simply don't have the framework to understand. All I know is that it felt real, it felt intentional, and it felt aware. And that's what stays with me. The feeling that whatever stood outside my window that night knew I was watching it, and chose to acknowledge me before disappearing. I was probably in 7th grade when this happened, and at that age, everything feels bigger, scarier, and more intense than it ever will again. I was staying over at my best friend's house for the night. He lived just outside a small town, in a rural area where the houses were spread far apart and the roads went quiet after dark. During the day, it felt peaceful. At night, it felt isolated in a way that made your imagination run wild. We had spent most of the evening doing what kids our age usually did when they had no supervision and too much energy. Playing video games, watching dumb movies, laughing about things that weren't actually funny. Eventually, the conversation turned to something we thought would be hilarious at the time. We decided it would be a great idea to go out and wrap some houses with toilet paper. Looking back, it was a stupid plan. But at that age, it felt rebellious and exciting. We actually asked his parents if we could go out that night. That should have been the end of it. His dad shut it down immediately. He told us no very clearly and said we were not allowed to leave the house. He wanted us to stay inside for the night. No discussion, no negotiation. That should have been the end of it. But my friend had always been bad at taking no for an answer. And I was the kind of kid who followed along even when I knew something was a bad idea. So we waited. We stayed up late, pretending to settle down for the night. Eventually, the house went quiet. The lights went out. We listened for footsteps, doors, any sign that someone was still awake. At about 1 a.m, we decided it was safe. We grabbed a giant black trash bag filled with rolls of toilet paper and quietly slipped out of the house. His house sat at the top of a hill, with a long gravel driveway that led down to the main road. The gravel crunched under our shoes, and we moved slowly, trying to keep the noise down. The night was pitch black, with no streetlights nearby, just the faint glow of the moon and the stars. We finally reached the road. The moment our shoes hit the pavement, my friend froze. He whispered that he heard a car coming and that we needed to get off the road immediately. I didn't hear it at first, but I trusted him. We both jumped down into the ditch along the side of the road and laid flat in the grass. A few seconds later, headlights appeared and a car sped by. We stayed still until the sound faded away. After a moment, we sat up, relieved, though laughing quietly about how close that was. We were just about to get moving again when my friend stiffened. "Shit, man," he whispered. "It's coming back." I didn't understand what he meant until I looked down the road. Far in the distance, I could see red brake lights. The car was slowing down. Then, right there in the middle of the road, it turned around. My stomach dropped. We immediately flattened ourselves back into the ditch. At this point, neither of us was laughing anymore. We were both wearing dark clothes, and it was completely dark outside. There was no reason for anyone to notice us. No reason for the car to be interested. The car came back down the road, but this time it was moving slowly. It passed us on the opposite side of the road. We stayed still, barely breathing, watching it through the tall grass. It drove past, which we waited. My friend kept his hand on my arm, holding me down. He slowly lifted his head just enough to see over the edge of the ditch. "Dude," he whispered, "it's coming again." By now, fear had fully set in. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the driver could hear it. The car didn't look like a police car. It was dark-colored, with no markings, no spotlight, nothing official about it. And if it wasn't a cop, then who was it? The worst possibilities flooded my mind. What if it wasn't just some random person? What if it was someone who had seen us and was looking for us? At that age, your brain doesn't jump to reasonable explanations. It jumps straight to the most terrifying ones. There was a culvert nearby, a concrete pipe that ran under the road. I started slowly army crawling toward it, thinking maybe I could hide inside if things got worse. My friend grabbed me and told me to stay still. The car rolled by again. This time it slowed down even more. Then it stopped, right over the top of us. We were pressed flat into the ground, not daring to move or look up. The car idled there for a moment, engine humming softly. Then it drove off. A few seconds passed. Then it came back again. It drove by slowly. It stopped. It drove off. This happened more than once. Each time, the fear grew stronger. We had no idea what was happening or why this car was so interested in this stretch of road. We felt trapped, exposed, and completely powerless. After the last time it drove away, we saw it go a short distance down the road. We didn't wait to see if it would turn around again. We jumped up, ditched the trash bag of toilet paper, and sprinted up the gravel driveway as fast as we could. We didn't look back. We didn't stop. We just ran. We burst into the house, slammed the door, locked everything, and set the alarms. We stood there in the dark, breathing hard, listening. A few minutes later, I looked out the window. The car was there. It was idling at the end of the driveway. Seeing it there made my blood run cold. It felt like confirmation that whatever had been happening on the road wasn't random. It knew where the house was. It knew where we had gone. We spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room, armed with plastic bats and hockey sticks, because that was all we had. We didn't sleep. We just watched and waited until morning. Looking back now, as an adult, I know there are 100 explanations that don't involve something horrible. It could have been a confused driver, someone lost, someone suspicious of kids sneaking around late at night, something harmless. But tell that to 7th grade me. At that age, in that moment, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. And I've never forgotten the feeling of being hunted in the dark. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. I was a sophomore in college when this happened. At that age where you feel just old enough to be confident, but not nearly old enough to understand how dangerous curiosity can be. I had 2 close friends who were just like me. We loved exploring abandoned places, old buildings, forgotten structures, anything that felt hidden or off-limits. Urban exploring had become our thing. We had already broken into empty factories, closed schools, and half-collapsed warehouses, and every time we came out with stories that made us feel brave and alive. So, when we started hearing rumors about an abandoned town hidden up in the foothills near the city where I went to college, we were immediately hooked. People talked about it like it was a myth. Some said it had been evacuated years ago. Others said it was unfinished housing that never got occupied. A few people hinted at darker things, but we brushed those off as exaggerations. In our minds, it was just another place to explore, another adventure, another story to tell. We didn't plan much. We never really did. That night, we packed what we always packed: flashlights, dark clothes, a couple bottles of water, and our phones on silent. We didn't bring weapons. We didn't tell anyone where we were going. At the time, that felt like part of the fun. It was around 11:30 at night when we reached the area. We parked far away, just like we always did. You never park close to a place you're not supposed to be. That's rule number 1. The car was left on a quiet stretch of road where no one would notice it. From there, we had to walk. The road leading towards the foothills was long, dark, and empty. No streetlights, no houses nearby, just the sound of our footsteps and the occasional night breeze moving through the trees. The farther we walked, the quieter everything became. Even the city noise faded until it felt like we were completely alone. Eventually, we reached the gate. The entire town was fenced in with tall iron fencing. Through the darkness, we could barely make out the shapes of buildings inside. They looked small at first, like they were shrinking into the shadows. It didn't feel like a single building or a small compound. It felt wide, spread out. We knew from the rumors that there was a way in. Somewhere along the side of the hill, there was supposed to be a small hole cut into the fence. The only direction we had was that it was across from a red house. So we started walking along the fence line. We're scanning the area until we finally spotted a red house in the distance. We assumed this had to be the one. Across from it was thick brush, trees, and uneven ground climbing up the hillside. Getting to the fence was harder than we expected. Branches scratched at our arms. Our shoes slipped on loose dirt and rocks. We had to grab onto roots and bushes just to keep from sliding down the hill. It felt like the land itself didn't want us there. Finally, we saw it. A small opening in the iron fence. It looked like someone had taken a saw and cut through just enough space for a person to squeeze through. There was nothing stable to stand on. If you let go of the branches around you, you would slide straight down the hill. One by one, we pushed ourselves through the hole. When we finally stood up on the other side, brushing dirt and leaves off our clothes, we froze. In front of us was an entire town. There were streets, a small market center, rows of houses, an apartment complex, side roads branching off into what looked like neighborhoods. It was all silent, completely still. No lights, no movement, just empty buildings under the night sky. For a moment, the fear disappeared, replaced by excitement. We had actually found it. We decided to start with the apartment complex. As we walked toward it, I heard something strange. A beep. At first I thought it was one of our phones, but they were all on silent. I stopped and asked if anyone else heard it. They did. A single, sharp beep, echoing faintly through the empty space. We shrugged it off and kept walking. Inside the first apartment, we found what you'd expect. Old furniture. Trash. A dirty mattress, signs that people had been there before us. Nothing too strange. But that beeping sound kept happening. Not constant, just every so often. We moved to another apartment. When we opened the door, we immediately felt something was wrong. The living room was filled with black trench coats. Some were hanging neatly, others were piled on the floor. There were far too many for one person. We didn't say much. We just stood there, staring, trying to understand why so many identical coats would be left behind like that. We went upstairs. One door was locked tight. We didn't try to force it. Something about that place made us uneasy, and for the first time that night, we decided not to push our luck. We left that apartment and went back outside. That's when we realized the beeping was happening in more than one place. But as we walked through the streets, the beeping came from different directions. And when we moved closer to certain buildings, the beeps grew faster and louder. When we moved away, they slowed down. That's when the feeling hit us. We were being watched. The excitement drained instantly, replaced by fear. Real fear. Not the fun kind, not the thrilling kind. The kind that tightens your chest and tells you something is very wrong. We kept moving, trying to act calm, trying not to panic. Then we saw the house. It was an old white house, completely run down. In the front yard, the ground was covered in shattered glass. But it wasn't scattered randomly. The glass had been carefully arranged into square shapes, forming a path that led straight to the front door. That was the moment we knew we shouldn't be there. We stood there, frozen, and debating whether to turn back or leave immediately. Then a beam of light blasted out from a top-floor window and landed directly on us. At the same time, the beeping exploded into rapid, aggressive bursts from multiple directions. We ran. We didn't talk. We didn't look back. We just ran as fast as we could through the streets of that abandoned town. Lights started turning on everywhere. Beams shot out from windows, rooftops, corners of buildings. It felt like a dozen flashlights tracking us, locking onto our movement. Our shadows stretched across walls as we sprinted. One of my friends tripped and fell. My heart stopped, but he got back up quickly and kept running. None of us knew for sure where the exit was, but we trusted that one of us did. I followed the friend in front of me, praying he remembered the path, and then I saw the hole in the fence. He crawled through. I helped the next friend squeeze through. As I stood there helping, I could see the light bouncing closer and closer. I didn't turn around, but I knew we were being chased. I dove through the hole, slid down the hill, scraping my arms and legs on branches and rocks. We ran down the road toward the car, not stopping until we were inside and the doors were locked. As we drove away, the beeping faded into nothing. 3 months later, we went back. The gate was gone, the fence torn down, the town demolished. Construction crews were everywhere. We asked one of the workers what the place had been. He told us it was a major gang hotspot. Drugs, murders, illegal activity. The city finally decided it was too dangerous to leave standing. Hearing that made everything click. We weren't imagining things. We were lucky to get out alive. Even now, years later, I think about how close we came to something much worse. And I still feel that fear creeping back whenever I remember those lights turning on, one by one, in the dark. When I was around 17 or 18 years old, I was living in a small village called Shipton Bellinger in Hampshire, England. It was the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. Quiet, rural, and surrounded by stretches of countryside that felt endless once the sun went down. There were 2 nearby towns, Tidworth and Ludgershall, and if you looked at them on a map, they almost formed a rough oval with the surrounding roads. Back then, I knew those roads well. Too well. I had always struggled with sleep. Even as a kid, I was the kind of person who would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, watching shadows move as cars passed outside. Around that time, I had also gotten really into fitness. Running, especially, became my outlet. It was the only thing that reliably exhausted me enough to actually sleep. So I started running late at night. Not just early evening runs, but proper late-night ones. Midnight, 1 in the morning. The world feels very different at those hours. Quieter, emptier, like you're the only person awake, moving through a place that's meant to be asleep. I liked that feeling at first. It felt peaceful, almost meditative. I would usually run the same route. I'd head out of Shipton Bellinger, go through Tidworth, loop around toward Ludgershall, and then make my way back home. It was a few miles in total, just enough to burn everything out of my system. By the time I got back, my legs would be heavy, my lungs burning, and my mind blissfully blank. Most nights were uneventful. That night was not. I was nearing the end of the circuit. I'd already passed through Tidworth and was heading back toward Ludgershall. There's a secondary school called Castledown that sits near a back road leading toward Shipton Bellinger again. If you know the area, you know exactly the road I mean. If you don't, imagine this. A narrow stretch of road with no streetlights at all once you leave the school behind. Thick trees lining both sides. And beyond them, Large open fields that disappear into darkness. It's not a place you'd want to be if something went wrong. I was under one of the last street lamps near the school, taking a short break. I'd slowed to a walk and bent down to tighten my laces, just making sure everything was secure before finishing the run. That's when I heard it. Noise. At first, it was just a rustling sound coming from the woods nearby. Leaves shifting, on branches snapping lightly. My first thought was that it was a deer. The area had plenty of them, and hearing animals move around at night wasn't unusual. I didn't think much of it, but the noise didn't stop. As I finished tying my laces and straightened up, the sound grew louder, heavier, more deliberate. It wasn't just random movement anymore. It sounded like something was pushing its way through undergrowth, not darting or scattering, but moving with purpose. I told myself not to be stupid. Animals make noise, woods make noise, night amplifies everything. I started jogging again, heading down the road toward Shipton-Bellinger. As I ran, the noise followed, not behind me, beside me, to my left in the woods. It grew louder with every step I took, matching my pace in a way that made my stomach tighten. Twigs snapped sharply now. Leaves tore. Whatever it wasn't small, and it wasn't moving away. I kept running. My breathing grew heavier, not just from the run, but from the sudden rush of adrenaline flooding my system. My ears strained, trying to locate the exact source of the sound, but it felt like it was everywhere at once. Then I heard the fence. There's a metal fence separating part of the woods from the road near that stretch. I heard it rattle violently, the unmistakable sound of metal shaking under weight. Not brushed, not lightly touched, shaken. Something was climbing it. That was the moment my brain stopped trying to rationalize. Nope. Every survival instinct I had kicked in at once. I didn't think. I didn't look. I just ran. I took off down that road faster than I ever had before. Full sprint. No pacing. No conserving energy. On just pure, blind flight. My legs burned instantly, but I ignored it. My lungs screamed for air, but I forced them to keep going. The road felt endless. The darkness pressed in from all sides. The trees blurred past me, my vision tunneling as panic took over. My mind latched onto one thought and repeated it over and over like a mantra. If it can catch me, it deserves me. I don't know why that thought came to me, but it did. Maybe it was my brain's twisted way of coping. Maybe it was gallows humor. Either way, it kept me moving. Another thought followed closely behind it. Don't waste time looking. You know it's there. Just run. I didn't dare glance back. I was terrified that if I did, I'd either see something I couldn't unsee, or I'd lose a fraction of a second, and that would be it. I focused on the road ahead, on the faint shapes of hedges and bends, on the distant glow of village lights that felt impossibly far away. Every sound behind me felt amplified. My own footsteps sounded too loud. My breathing sounded ragged and desperate. I half expected to feel something grab me at any second. A hand, a claw, teeth, anything. But nothing touched me. Eventually, the trees thinned out, and the first houses of the village came into view. The darkness lifted just enough for me to feel a sliver of relief. I slowed to a stop near the edge of the village, hands on my knees, gasping for air. I turned around. I stood there for about a minute, scanning the darkness behind me. The road was empty. The trees were still. No movement, no sound, no shape emerging from the shadows. After that minute felt like an eternity, I turned and jogged the rest of the way home, or not daring to relax until I was inside, door locked behind me. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed replaying the sounds over and over in my head. The way the noise had followed me. The fence shaking. The certainty I'd felt in that moment that whatever it was had meant to reach me. To this day, I don't know what it was. It could have been an animal, a deer, a wild boar, even a person messing about in the woods. But none of those explanations fully sit right with me. The timing, the way it moved, the way it seemed to react the moment I started running. And honestly, I'm glad I never found out. Some answers aren't worth having. When I was growing up, I lived in a housing addition where most of the Kiowa families in my hometown had settled after the area was built. It wasn't a big place, and that was part of what made it feel so familiar and safe. Everyone knew everyone, or at least knew who belonged there. Kids played outside late into the evening. Elders sat on porches, and there was a quiet understanding that this was our space. The addition itself was simple. There were 3 main streets running parallel to each other, connected at both ends by 2 shorter streets, almost like a stretched-out rectangle. My grandmother's house sat on one of the corners at the end of the middle street. Her place was easy to spot because there was a street lamp right outside, casting a soft yellow light over the corner every night. And that light had always made me feel comfortable, like a small island of safety in the dark. On the opposite side of the connecting street, there was a standard farmer's barbed wire fence. Beyond that fence were open fields belonging to local farmers. During the day, it was just land, grass, and sky. At night, it turned into a wide, dark unknown. The fence ran the length of the street, and while it wasn't especially tall, it was high enough to make you think twice about climbing it. On the other side were tall grasses, fallen branches, and patches of trees that blended together once the sun went down. When I was around 15 years old, I spent a lot of time outside at night with friends. It wasn't unusual for us to hang out under street lamps, talking about school, joking around, and killing time. That night was no different. 2 friends and I were standing under the street lamp near my grandma's house. The light hummed faintly overhead, and the air was calm. Nothing felt strange at first. We were laughing and talking about nothing important, just being teenagers, enjoying the night, feeling free. My family was away at a powwow, so my grandma's house was empty. I didn't really think about that at the time. It was just another quiet night. At some point, my attention drifted toward the fence at the corner where the other main street started. There was another street lamp over there, too, but its light didn't reach everything evenly. A couple of large trees stood nearby, their branches hanging low and casting deep shadows across the fence line and the ground around it. That's when I saw it. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. There was a shape sitting near the fence, partially hidden by shadow. It was very still. Too still. My brain tried to fill in the blanks automatically. Maybe it was a dog. Maybe it was a large stray. Animals weren't uncommon in the area. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. The shape was sitting back on its hind legs, like a canine would. But something about its posture didn't sit right with me. It wasn't relaxed. It wasn't shifting or scratching or sniffing the ground. It was just there, completely silent, completely motionless. Then I noticed its eyes. They weren't reflecting the streetlight the way animal eyes usually do. They were glowing. Not bright, not flashing, just a soft, steady yellow glow that stood out against the darkness. The rest of the figure appeared entirely black, looked like it absorbed the light around it instead of reflecting it. I felt a chill run through me. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared, trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. But the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Finally, I pointed toward it and asked my friends, "What is that?" they turned to look. All three of us stood there in silence, staring at the same thing. No one laughed. No one made a joke. That alone told me everything I needed to know. If it had been something normal, one of us would have brushed it off. But none of us did. The figure slowly turned its head and looked directly at us. Those seconds felt endless. I don't know how long it really lasted. Maybe 2 seconds? Maybe 5. But in that moment, time seemed to stretch thin. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The air felt heavier. My mouth went dry. The glowing eyes were fixed on us, unblinking. Then, in one smooth, fluid motion, it moved. It didn't crouch first. It didn't hesitate. It turned and leapt over the fence in a single motion. The fence was at least 5 feet high, maybe a little more, and the figure cleared it easily. As it jumped, its body twisted slightly, like it had done this before, like it knew exactly how to move. And then it was gone. No sound, no rustling grass, no snapping branches. Nothing. On the other side of the fence was tall grass, fallen leaves, and broken branches. If a large animal had jumped into that, we should have heard something. Anything. But the night stayed completely silent, as if whatever had been there had simply vanished into the dark. None of us said a word. We didn't need to. The fear hit all of us at once. We turned and ran. We didn't stop to think. We didn't look back. We ran straight down the street toward my friend's grandmother's house, which was at the far end of the addition, away from where we'd seen the figure. My grandma's house was closer, but there was no way I was going to stay there alone that night. Not after what we had just seen. We burst into my friend's grandma's house, breathless and shaken. She immediately knew something was wrong. We must have looked terrified, because she didn't scold us or ask why we were running. She just asked what happened. We told her everything. She listened quietly, her face serious. When we finished, she nodded slowly and told us something I've never forgotten. She said that there are many mysterious things in the dark in that part of Oklahoma, especially in the deep Southwest. She told us we should be grateful that whatever we saw wasn't malignant, that there are things out there that mean harm and things that don't, and sometimes you're lucky enough to only see them once. She didn't laugh at us. She didn't tell us we were imagining things. She didn't try to explain it away. That scared me more than anything. Growing up, I heard countless stories from my family. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, elders. Stories about strange encounters, things seen in the distance, things that didn't fit neatly into explanations. Back then, I listened, but I didn't truly understand. After that night, those stories felt different, closer, more real. To this day, I don't know what we saw. I don't think I want to know. Some questions don't need answers. Some things are better left as they are, as moments that remind you that the world is bigger, darker, and stranger than you'd like to believe. And every time I think back on that night, I still remember those glowing yellow eyes staring at us from the shadows before disappearing into the darkness without a sound. When I was very young, I had a teddy bear named Spock. He wasn't special in the way expensive toys are special. He wasn't rare or fancy or collectible. He was just mine. His ears were pointy, which is why I named him Spock. And from the moment I got him, we were inseparable. I think I was 3 or 4 years old when I was given him, but I don't remember the exact moment. What I remember is that once he was there, he never left my side. Spock went everywhere with me. He slept in my arms every night. He sat next to me when I watched TV. He came with me on trips, even short ones. He was more than a toy in the way only children can understand. He was comfort. He was safety. He was routine. If I was scared, I held Spock. If I was sad, I cried into him. He absorbed everything. My older brother knew how much I loved that bear. Like many older siblings, he also knew exactly how to push my buttons. One time he snatched Spock from me and started punching him over and over, laughing while I screamed and cried. I remember that moment clearly. I remember the rage, the helplessness, the heartbreak. At the time, it felt like the worst thing in the world. Now, years later, I can laugh about it. Kids are cruel. Siblings are worse. That moment faded. What happened later did not. I don't remember my exact age when it happened. I think I was around 8, give or take a year. That part is fuzzy. Everything else is not. Every detail of that night is burned into my memory with a clarity that makes it impossible for me to dismiss it, no matter how much I want to. That night started like every other night. I went to bed with Spock, tucked under my arm the way he always was. But there was nothing unusual, no fear, no bad feeling, just the comfort of routine. I fell asleep holding him. At some point in the night, I woke up suddenly, not fully awake at first, foggy, disoriented, the kind of waking where your mind takes a few seconds to catch up with your body. I remember lying there, staring into the darkness, trying to remember where I was, what night it was, whether it was a school night or a weekend. And then I noticed something wrong. Spock wasn't there. At first, my brain tried to ignore it. Sometimes you shift in your sleep. Sometimes things fall. But after a second or two, I knew he wasn't just out of reach. He was gone. I sat up and scanned my bed. Nothing. I reached around blindly, patting the sheets, the floor next to the bed. Nothing. That's when I fully woke up. My heart started beating faster. I sat there, trying to think logically. Maybe my mum had taken him while I was asleep to wash him. That seemed possible. Reasonable. I didn't know exactly what I thought, only that I needed him back immediately. I couldn't just lie there without him. So I got out of bed. I marched down the hallway toward my mum's room, already preparing myself to demand my bear back. I opened her door. She wasn't there. That stopped me cold. It was the middle of the night. She should have been asleep. I stood there for a moment, confused, then thought maybe she was in my brother's room. Maybe she had gone to check on him or something. I moved down the hallway, turning on lights as I went. Every switch I passed, I flipped on. I didn't want the dark anymore. My brother's room was empty. Now I was genuinely scared. I started telling myself they must be downstairs, that they had stayed up late, fallen asleep on the couch, and forgotten to turn off the lights. I remember trying to feel angry, trying to convince myself that I was annoyed with them for scaring me, because anger felt safer than fear. I went downstairs. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. The house was completely silent. At that age, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My mum would never, ever leave me home alone at night. Never. No matter what. My brother might play tricks on me, but my mum would not. That thought made my fear spike into something sharper, more desperate. I had checked the whole house, or so I thought. Then I remembered the basement. I had forgotten about the basement entirely, and when I remembered it, my stomach dropped. The basement was the one place I hated. I avoided it whenever I could. It was dark, cold, and felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain back then. But remembering the basement also gave me a strange sense of relief. They must be down there. I don't know why I thought that. It didn't really make sense. But my mind latched onto the idea because the alternative was unbearable. I told myself they were down there, maybe sorting something, maybe watching TV, maybe doing something adults do that kids don't understand. That thought was the only thing that allowed me to move forward. I walked slowly toward the basement door. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The basement door was slightly open. Just a crack. Up until that point, I had been completely silent. I don't know why. Maybe instinct, maybe fear. But standing there, I staring at that cracked door, something inside me snapped. I pushed it open and screamed with everything I had. "Mom!" My voice echoed down the stairs. No answer. I took a few steps down, just enough to reach the light switch. My hands were shaking as I flipped it on. That's when I saw Spock. He was partially hidden behind a toolbox. I could see his lower half sticking out, unmistakable. There was no doubt it was him. Seeing him should have comforted me. Instead, it terrified me. It felt wrong. It felt like he had been placed there on purpose, like he was bait, like I was being invited into the basement to retrieve him. I did not go get him. I turned and ran. I sprinted back upstairs, back to my room, and dove under my bed. I pulled myself as far back as I could and stayed there, shaking, until I fell asleep from exhaustion. But the next morning, my mum woke me by calling out that breakfast was ready. Her voice was normal, calm, safe. I crawled out from under the bed, confused and embarrassed. I immediately started telling myself it had all been a dream, a vivid nightmare. That explained everything. That had to be it. Then I noticed something else. Spock was still missing. At breakfast, my mum and brother were both there, acting completely normal. They asked me why all the lights in the house were on when they woke up. My brother joked that if it was me, I was in trouble. My mum looked confused, not amused. I asked them why they had left the house in the middle of the night. They had no idea what I was talking about. Later that day, I told my mum everything. The waking up, the empty house, the basement, finding Spock, hiding under the bed. For once, she didn't laugh or brush it off. She looked genuinely concerned. She searched the entire house, including the basement. Spock was never found. He didn't turn up years later. He didn't appear in storage. He was just gone. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was a dream, sleepwalking, something psychological, or something else entirely. I only know that my bear vanished, the lights were on, and I woke up under my bed. And that is something I will never laugh about. When my friend and I graduated from college, we decided to take a road trip to Florida to celebrate. It felt like the perfect way to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. We were young, free, and excited, and the idea of driving all the way down to Florida felt like an adventure instead of a chore. Neither of us had real responsibilities yet. No full-time jobs, no families to worry about, just time, a car, and the open road. We left our Midwest state early in the morning, full of energy and optimism. The plan was simple: drive as far as we could the first day, crash somewhere cheap, then finish the trip the next day. We didn't want to rush it. Part of the fun was the journey itself, stopping when we felt like it, letting the trip unfold naturally. That first night, we ended up in Atlanta, where neither of us knew the city very well, but we had heard enough to know there were plenty of bars and places to hang out. We checked into a cheap hotel, dropped our bags, and headed out. The night was warm, the city buzzing, and we were riding that post-graduation high, where everything feels possible. At some point, we found ourselves outside a dive bar called the Highlander. It was one of those places that looks rough around the edges but feels welcoming once you're there. Cheap drinks, loud music, people spilling out onto the sidewalk. We were standing outside, probably debating whether to go back in or find another bar, when a guy and his girlfriend struck up a conversation with us. They were friendly right away. Nothing forced or weird. Just casual small talk. They asked where we were from, what we had studied, where we were headed, but we told them we had just graduated and were driving to Florida to celebrate. They smiled and told us they had just graduated too. They were from Rockford, Illinois. That stuck with me because it felt like such a small world moment. We were all roughly the same age, all fresh out of college, all feeling that same mix of excitement and uncertainty about the future. It felt easy to talk to them, natural, like if we had met under different circumstances, we might have actually become friends. We stood there talking for a while, laughing, sharing stories about school, professors we hated, classes that nearly broke us. They mentioned they wanted to get married someday, but they weren't engaged yet. It was said casually, like it was just a matter of time, like their future was already laid out in front of them. Eventually, the night started winding down. They said they were heading back to their hotel. We said we were thinking about hitting one more bar. So we all walked off together for a bit before parting ways. I remember watching them get into their car. It was a black 2005 BMW Z4 convertible. Clean. Nice. The kind of car that stands out. On the back was a Chicago Bears decal. They waved goodbye, got in, and drove off into the Atlanta night. That was it. The next morning we woke up hungover, groggy, and sore in that familiar post-drinking way. The excitement of the night before had dulled, replaced by pounding headaches and dry mouths. We grabbed some coffee, checked out of the hotel, and loaded up the car. Florida was waiting. We got on Interstate 75 and started heading south. At first, everything was fine. Traffic was moving. The sun was up. And the road stretched ahead of us, promising beaches and warm water and celebration. Then we hit traffic. Not just slow traffic. Dead stop, bumper-to-bumper traffic. Cars packed tightly together, creeping forward inch by inch. We groaned, annoyed, assuming it was construction or an accident far ahead. At first we joked about it, complained, checked our phones. But as the minutes dragged on, the mood shifted. We were stuck like that for over an hour. Eventually, we started seeing emergency vehicles on the side of the road, police cars, ambulances. That's when we knew it was an accident. And judging by how long traffic had been stopped, it wasn't a small one. As we inched closer to the source, people around us started slowing down even more, craning their necks, trying to see what had happened. Rubbernecking. The thing everyone does, even though they hate themselves for doing it. Then we saw it. On the side of the highway was a wrecked black BMW Z4 on its side. The top was open. 2 blue tarps were laid out on the ground nearby. My stomach dropped instantly. I didn't want to believe it. My brain tried to reject what my eyes were seeing, but then I saw the Chicago Bears decal on the back of the car. It was the same car. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened. My mouth went dry. I felt sick. As we passed by slowly, I saw more than I wanted to see. One of the bodies was partially uncovered. Her arm was severed and lying next to one of the tarps. Just there, exposed, real, horribly real. I don't remember breathing as we passed. I don't remember saying anything. I don't even remember how long it took before we were past the scene and traffic began to clear. Once we were moving again, the car was silent. Neither of us knew what to say. What could you say? We had been talking to them just hours earlier, laughing, sharing stories, making casual plans for the future, and now they were gone. I don't remember their names. I don't even remember if they told us. That's the part that bothers me the most. Names fade, faces blur, but the feeling doesn't. They were our age. They had just graduated. They were in love. They had plans. Sometimes, even now, years later, I catch myself thinking about them, wondering what they would be doing if that accident hadn't happened. Would they be married by now? Would they have kids? Would they be working jobs they loved or jobs they tolerated? Would they still be talking about the future the way they did that night outside the bar? It's strange how people can pass through your life so briefly and leave such a deep mark. That trip to Florida still happened. We still went to the beach, We still celebrated. But something shifted in me after that. A quiet understanding that life doesn't wait for milestones, that plans don't guarantee futures, that everything can change in the space of a single night on the highway. I don't think about them every day, but I think about them more than I think I should, considering how little time we actually spent together. And every time I do, it unsettles me in a way that never really goes away. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.